when we should examine one's light. Not only will we acknowledge an intelligence, but we will also discover the DNA which connects us all as one. Welcome to Light Insight with Hillis Pugh, where we dive into the mind's light. Only on Real Revolution Radio X.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Light Insight, where we dive into the mind's light. And today we have an amazing guest with us today. Her name is Jana Kellam. She is a mindset and relationship coach, and she uses transformational coaching techniques such as EFT, tapping, advanced training in the law of attraction, and equine facilitated experiences, learning to help single ladies attract a partner of their dreams and partnered ladies to sustain them in expanded, loving ways in every day. Jana, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's so amazing to have you, especially now during this eventful time in our history, where we are homebound and say, okay, you got to stay home. There's nothing else that you can do except be at home.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing during this self-containment, self-quarantine time?
I was thinking when we went into this self-quarantine that things would kind of calm down and we'd be able to have all of this extra time. But what has happened, I have a 6-year-old son, and so his school closed, I guess, like 2 weeks ago almost now. And so I've been trying to kind of keep my coaching practice going while also being a homeschooling parent, and also trying to kind of be tech support for a whole bunch of people in my circle who are like, how do I use Zoom, or how do I get onto Facebook and talk to people? And so I've been doing a lot of that as well, and still trying to keep up with exercising my body and meditation and all of the other things that were kind of my usual practice. So it has been active, even though it's been in a much more kind of self-contained space, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, and people, especially if you're a holistic practitioner or an energy worker or alternative medicines or anything of that nature, it's interesting because people assumed that there would be this extra time. It really is, and it's just more different in how you navigate it. And I can say personally, last week, was really interesting because I had people reaching out to me wanting to do these social media live collaborations and still doing these things. And so it's interesting because when you have this virtual space and now you're utilizing it in a different way, and the bandwidth and the visibility and the really wanting to catch and see and do all these things, it's like you're basically at an online festival / smorgasbord. Like, what do you want to partake in? The choice is yours,
Totally, yeah. Yeah, that's such a great way to describe this experience. It is a smorgasbord. It's like, take your pick. My son is doing like virtual Taekwondo classes, and it's just, it's
what?
It's really, it's very cool, like all the stuff that's available, and how it's encouraging us to be really creative in the ways that we share our gifts and what we know with others. And so if there's a silver lining, and I always try to find one, that's definitely one of them.
Yes, indeed. And I can definitely say, speaking of gifts, well, you have a plethora of gifts. So one of them is writing. And
Oh, thank
I
you.
want us to, oh, you're so welcome. And I want us to go in and talk about your latest book of one of your many talents. It is titled Straight from a Horse's Mouth, Relationship Secrets That Take Your Love Life from Meh to Magical.
Yes.
So how did this process come about? How did you get the inspiration? Because I know you talk about the love of your life in this book. And I just want to know, how did this inspire the writings?
Yeah. Well, the whole book kind of was based on my really wanting to honor the life of my horse, whose name was Jove, and he was a pretty magical creature and came into my life in a very unexpected way and changed my life in so many unexpected ways. I mean, he was just a gift, and I learned so much from my time with him. And what I realized after his death is that it was so important to me to keep his wisdom kind of flowing forward, even though he wasn't with us anymore physically, which, now it's been almost 4 years since his passing. And so I'm finally able to talk about him without just bursting into tears. But he just gave me and so many of the people that I worked with just this series of lessons that I wanted to make sure didn't just disappear when his physical self did and he wasn't able to do sessions in the same kind of way. So I wrote this series of blog posts on my website, and then I decided that I wanted it to be even more sort of fleshed out than the blog posts were, and to have a more kind of more of a through line, and to be really specifically for people to understand how to have healthy, authentic relationships. So I put it all into this book and put it out into the world. So it's now available in an ebook version and also in a paperback version. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That's kind of the short version of the story. Of course, there's always the long version, but
yeah, being an author, we know that there's always the long version, which people would never want to sit down fully and hear, and then we just condense it as always. But what I appreciate more so is how you describe your relationship with Jove, how you really take it all in, and how in the beginning you were a bit hesitant to be involved with another horse again. And do you find that the hesitation that you have experienced is transferable or relatable to most relationships with people?
Yes. Big time. I think that I kind of joked about this with you the other day when we chatted, but since I consider myself a relationship and mindset coach, and so when you're a relationship coach, everything looks like relationships, I guess. At least that's my experience. So I think of all of our life experiences are relationships. So the way that we relate to our romantic partners is a relationship, obviously. The way that we relate to our bodies, the way we relate to our souls, the way we relate to our children, the way we relate to money, the way we relate to our work in the world, it's all relationship. So it's kind of like the way that we do anything, and the way that, I used to guide these facilitated learning experiences with Jove, with my horse, and he would teach people exactly what it is that they needed to know, but always what they learned in that round pen with Jove, they could take out into their life, into their everyday life, and see, when Jove did this, I felt like this, and I'm noticing that I tend to do the same thing. I have the same sort of pattern of interactions with other people that I did, with Jove in that round pen, just in that one session that I had with him. So yes, it's definitely, you can extrapolate, you can use that experience. And even that, I kind of wrote this book as almost like one long kind of series of experiential learning sessions with Jove, so that you can really, so it's not just like, here, read this, and then go on to the next thing. Like, if you wanted to, you could really dive deep with this material and interact with it. There's a chapter that has a series of images in it, and one of the things that I talk about is that the way that you understand or the way that you relate to those images will tell you a lot about yourself and how you're relating to other people and what you believe about relationships and what you believe about yourself and the world. And so it's kind of all there and available for us, even though sometimes it's a little bit harder to see and to feel.
Yes, definitely. And, I'm glad that you kind of brought up that piece about people taking the time to be reflective when you look at those images, and how relationship is just not with you, the individual, and another human being. It's with every animate and inanimate object, living and non-living being that's in existence.
Yeah.
But, what I really want to know is, since you love Jove and you had all these interactive sessions with your clients, what was the communication like? How did it really differ from person to person, and how did you really develop, and how did you and Jove and your clients respectively really have this communicative relationship? How did it work? How did it be? How was it understood,
Yeah. So, with each client that we would work with had kind of a different experience, not kind of a different, they all had different experiences with Jove. So whatever they were coming in with would be reflected back to them in some way. So we had a series of kind of activities that we would do together that each one kind of built along on the next or on the previous one, so that by the time we got to the end of the session, we were doing what's called a reflective session, where I would help the client to come up with a question to ask Jove. And so they would go into the round pen and they would just kind of have this question. Either they would say it out loud, or they would just kind of say it internally, and they would get their answer based on their perspective, their understanding of what Jove was doing with them. And so sometimes that would look like, let's say they had a question about, like, what do I need to know so that I can finally find the love of my life? Or what's blocking me from finally meeting the love of my life? So we would come up with that question. They would go in, and depending on how Jove interacted with them, they would get their answer. And sometimes it would look from the outside, from my perspective on the outside of the round pen, like there wasn't a whole lot happening. And then the client would come out and they would be like, here's everything that Jove just told me. He just took me on this journey, and it was, so I learned really quickly to not let my own, or to do my best, to not let my own kind of preconceived ideas about what was happening or what Jove was trying to tell them get in the way of what they were getting, because people always got what they needed. Jove was so good. Yeah. And really, horses in general are great at this, because they don't have the same thing that people do, where they try to be polite, or they try to, only tell you what they think you want to hear. They don't do any of that. There's no pretense at all. They just are kind of being with you where you are in that moment. And Jove could sense what the information was that people were needing to get, or what the feeling was that people were needing to feel. And then, I would kind of sort of help to facilitate that experience, but none of it was like, here's what I think you should do, or here's what I think you need to know. So it was this really powerful process of kind of guiding people back to themselves. It wasn't, it wasn't a instructive in that sense. It was really just here's how you can get to know you, your higher you, your you with a capital Y, as I put it.
Yeah, getting a better connection with yourself and in relation to the relationship that you want, whether it's, with a friend or family member, or to attract that loved one or sustain the loving relationship that you already have. And it's just like whatever's in the way, let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
And I know that you also talk about in the book about the energy orientations, and I know that plays a big part in your work. So can you tell us a little bit about what these 4 energy orientations are and what their purpose?
Yeah. So anytime we are interacting with anyone or anything outside of ourselves, we have a certain sort of stance, energetically speaking. And I refer to that as an energetic orientation. But essentially, you can either be kind of in an energy forward kind of a orientation where almost like literally you're pushing your energy out of yourself and at others. And then there's sort of a more energy back orientation where you kind of are almost like, I'm doing all of this in my body, not like you or anyone else can see me, but I just kind of, if this was a video, it would be much easier to describe this because it's kind of hard to describe with words. But essentially you are kind of bringing your energy into yourself. So people who are very shy tend to be in energy back orientations. And then energy vertical is when you tend to be very, really strong, really independent, sort of unmoved by things happening around you. You're just sort of like, I call it kind of like being inside of your cylinder. You're in your own space. You have pretty strong boundaries, but you also kind of don't let people in. You have such strong boundaries that you don't really let people into your world very easily. And then there's the 4th, which is kind of almost like a combination of all of those different orientations, where depending on the situation, you're sort of dynamically moving in through all of those states, depending on what's going on outside of you and what's going on inside of you. And that's called the energy dance or the energetic dance. So you can explore, if I brought my energy forward right now, what would happen there? If I brought my energy back, what would happen there? If I brought my energy to a more vertical position, what would happen there? So that's ultimately what I want to encourage people to move toward, to being able to move through those 3 other different energetic orientations in a moment's notice, so that you're able to be responsive, so that you're able to stay in a healthy place of connection no matter what is happening around you. And so that's when it gets really fun, when you can play with that energy and stay in those really healthy connections with people.
Yeah, I love that you describe that beautifully, and it's also just as easy to read in the book as well. Because when I read it, this makes really good sense in how you worded it and how each stage led into the next. So would you say, or how was this concept developed? Because from me reading it and then from you describing it as well, it sounds like there's a little bit of the law of attraction that's based in this as well. So can you turn this out of that, and how did you go about creating these different orientations?
Yeah. So my training in the equine facilitated experiential learning came out of a program called the Epona approach, which I learned from a woman named Barbara Alexander, and so a lot of this is kind of based on that, but then incorporating my own individual approach, which is, like I grew up dancing, and I also grew up with the law of attraction being a really significant part of my life experience growing up. My mother was really into it, and she taught. I grew up with like Abraham Hicks and with the Seth material and all of that sort of stuff. So that was kind of just like second nature to me to kind of combine those two things and to think of it as being a dance. But of course, the law of attraction is, it is its own thing. But there's an aspect of it that I think is so helpful in this process of understanding where our own energy is. So if you are thinking of law of attraction as just being kind of one of the laws of the universe, then that means that what you are focusing on is what you will get more of. And so, for example, people who are in that kind of energetic orientation tend to be very internally focused, and they tend to not kind of reach out for connection. They tend to expect other people to come to them. And so just like with the law of attraction, you can use that for your benefit, or you can kind of be using it without even being totally aware that you are. It's just, it's just part of
default,
life.
as I like to call it.
Yes, exactly. So why the reason that I like for people to be aware of where their own energy is so that they can work with the laws of the universe in a way that benefits them and everybody around them, and allows for there to be these really powerfully connected, healthy relationships, instead of it being by default or just kind of like the fallback position kind of thing. So yes, it's great to be able to be in that energy back, that kind of relaxed, chill orientation. Sometimes being in an energy back orientation, once you've already established a connection, can kind of be this alluring, attractive energy. But if you're just energy back all of the time, then people won't even notice you.
Yeah, it's
so
like you have to step up and then allow yourself to be seen, and then expect the goodness, what you want to come into play after you have made your claim, so to speak.
Right, exactly, yes.
Yeah, I teach about the law of attraction, so I know all about it. But what
and go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the thing about the law of attraction that I keep seeing this happen more and more is that people tend to see it as this very kind of two-dimensional sort of thing. Like as though it's like you can think about something and then it happens immediately. And that's just not how the law of attraction really works. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. So, we have the buffer of time, and there's so many different kind of complexities to it. And I think a lot of times people use the law of attraction as an excuse to either not do their work and just kind of expect that they can be in that energy back orientation and things will just fall into their laps, and which sometimes can happen, but for the most part, like, we're here in these physical bodies to really experience life and to get in there and get our hands dirty, work the play, and so that's kind of this whole book and this material, sort of my effort to bring that into the collective consciousness, that there's there's just so much more to it. It's this beautifully complex kind of interwoven web of possibility and opportunity, and we are doing our dance in the midst of it. And so it's not as simple as just, you want this thing and then you get it. So anyhow, that's a subject that we could probably spend hours talking about.
We could talk about that. We could talk about the law of attraction all day.
Yeah.
But I know we've been sitting here talking about how the relationship connection between people and horses and the reflective style and the communication.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what my listeners are really eager to know, because I'm eager to know, is how is me spending time with a horse going to better myself and my relationship? I understand that we are both physical beings on a planet that are here to serve our purpose, but the communication styles are different. Verbal and non-verbal communication.
Yeah.
Even though the energy is there, but how is me, going in your pen to spend time with the horse going to improve my relationship?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, one of the things that came up again and again and again in sessions with Jove was teaching people about boundaries. And I think that boundaries are such a vitally important part of healthy relationships that get overlooked so often. People either tend to have these walls up because they're like, I've been hurt before and it's not going to happen again, so I'm going to put up like basically a fortress around myself, and nobody's getting in and nothing's getting out either. And then they are surprised that nobody's showing up to be in relationship with them, or they have such weak boundaries that they just kind of become like doormats and they just let people walk all over them. And Jove would, if he was in the round pen with someone who had really poor boundaries or non-existent boundaries, he would find a way to make them set a boundary with him. And sometimes that could come across as being a little bit harsh, but he recognized how important those boundaries are. Horses are herd animals, and so they communicate, as you mentioned before, almost exclusively with body language, with energy. And so inside of a herd, they have this kind of complex interactive hierarchy, and the way that they determine who is going to be the best leader, the way that they determine who they want to hang out with, the way that they are able to get to safety when they need to quickly, all of those different things is based on their sensitivity to energy. And so they're really good at teaching that. And, like baby horses are taught by their mothers and the other horses in the herd how to behave with each other. And some human babies are taught that, and others don't really quite get the same messages about how to have clear boundaries and how to respect the boundaries of others. So Jove would really teach that. He would teach how to have your own boundaries, because he might like come over and kind of really get up in your space when you're clearly uncomfortable with that, and he would kind of just keep pushing into your space until you were willing to say, oh, okay, that's enough. You need to back up, or you need to be over here and let me be over here in my space. And so people can really have that felt, visceral experience of, oh, this is what it feels like when someone is crossing these boundaries. And sometimes people would get angry about that, or sometimes they would be fearful and then they would get angry about it. And Jove always sort of knew exactly where to push and how far to push so that people could feel it and then set the boundary, and then have the experience after they set the boundary of him still being there, but being there in a respectful, healthy way instead of being there all over them. And then the other side of that, the other side of that dynamic is that he might kind of, for somebody who didn't have great boundaries or didn't respect the boundaries of others, if they kind of came right up to him, you know, without pausing to make sure that he was okay with it, then he might just like totally walk away from them. He might pin his ears, you know, in kind of like irritation with them. So he would show them what it was like when they were ignoring another being's boundaries, so that they could have that feeling and that understanding of, ooh, I'm doing that. I'm pushing people away by just totally ignoring their signals to me. So, yeah, there's definitely, you know, a range, a spectrum there.
And so it sounds like there are a lot of ways to establish and even break boundaries.
Yeah.
And I want to just chat a little bit more about that when we come back from break, because you talk about in your book a sweet spot. So I wanted us to dive into that a little bit when we come back from break.
Great.
Whether it's coming from the world of entertainment, integrative medicine, quantum theory, conspiracy facts, ancient archaeology, sacred geometry, financial trends, or perhaps even from the very world of self-help and motivational speaking, Real Revolution Radio possesses the information you need. Listen today to our daily inspiring lineup of podcast radio talk shows, only on realrevolutionradio.com.
Today to the Marine Show, where we will introduce you to the world of alternative remedies. Join Marine Pisani as she hosts discussions with leading experts in the fields of hypnotherapy, acupuncture, yoga, Ayurveda, EFT, chronic healing, integrative medicine, and so much more. Marine will also brave topics that many consider taboo. Yes, taboo talk. Tune in today to the Marine Show, heard on popular social media and now on Smart TV. Hey, what's up? Come on for this radio production only on realrevolutionradio.com.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cleveland, we now have liftoff to a higher level of consciousness. Tune in to realrevolutionradio.com, the #1 source for independent music and inspirational podcast radio. Awaken, evolve, inspire, and join the evolution only on realrevolutionradio.com.
You're listening to realrevolutionradio.com. There's hope as long as you're alive.
And we are back with Jana Kellam, author of Straight from the Horse's Mouth. And before we went to break, we were talking about boundaries and how you can either push away someone or welcome them into your space by having solid boundaries. But what I want to really get into now is the sweet spot. What is that, Jana? What's the sweet spot you talk about in the book?
Yeah, so the sweet spot is kind of that midway point between over-the-top, impenetrable boundaries that I call the fortress and being that doormat, you know, the other end of the spectrum where you just are a total pushover. So I encourage people to find their own unique sweet spot. And I think of every relationship as having its own kind of boundary sweet spot. So, you know, you might have different boundaries for your child than you do for, you know, a coworker, for example. But either way, you know, regardless of who we're talking about that you have those boundaries with, you need to have boundaries that are clear and consistent and that are directly communicated to that person that you're in that relationship with, so that you can have that healthy connection. Because when boundaries are not clear, or when they're not clearly communicated, or when they change, from moment to moment with no updates to the other person, it's really confusing. And that confusion can cause people to feel literally unsafe in a relationship. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Hillis, of like where you say something or you do something with someone that was totally great with them, a few days before, and then all of a sudden they're like, don't say that, or don't do that to me, or don't, and they kind of like freak out on you. And that's really obviously uncomfortable.
Everyone has experienced that.
Yeah. And of course the other way goes too, where you have somebody who's just like, oh, it's fine. It's totally fine. Do whatever. I have no opinion about that, or I don't care. They never really let you know what matters to them, what's important to them, what their desires are, what their boundaries are. So you're just kind of constantly like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? And then eventually you stop asking, and then, that person just like pieces out, and you're like, why did they leave? And meanwhile, they're feeling like this person, wasn't treating me well. And you're like, you never told me how you wanted to be treated. So it can just be really frustrating, and it can feel really unsafe, and it doesn't feel good to either participant in the relationship to have unclear boundaries. And that's not to say that they can't change over time. Certainly boundaries can be a dynamic kind of flowing thing, but it's really important that you keep that communication open. So, if you were to say, like, let's say you had a boundary around something that you were like, I'm really not okay with this. You can, for example, in the bedroom, I'm a relationship coach, so of course my mind goes to that immediately. And people's tastes change, and people's desires change, and people, you might be okay with a certain something in the bedroom at one point, and then you're not okay with it at another point, and that's totally okay. You just have to communicate that. You have to be open and honest in expressing what's good with you and what's not good with you.
Yeah, would you say the best way to communicate that is cultivating and creating what you call high quality questions? And if so, how do they differ from the low quality questions that we tend to either ask others or ask our partners or even of ourselves?
Oh, I love that idea of a connection between high quality questions and boundary setting. And yes, I think absolutely, high quality questions are kind of a way of opening us up to ideas, to solutions, to ways of looking at things that we might not have been able to otherwise. So I'll just real quick kind of explain the way that I use high quality questions in my life and with clients and et cetera. A lot of times our brains as human beings are just kind of going in the background, doing their own kind of little loop. So, and very often that loop tends to be filled with what I call low quality questions. So things like, why does this always happen to me? Or why does he always treat me so poorly? Or like, why won't he ever do what I've asked him to do? Or why doesn't my kid clean his room? Right now there's a lot of that. We're spending so much time with our families that we're seeing, we tend to kind of get impatient and start seeing all of those little things that are annoying us. But if you notice what happens when you're asking those kinds of questions, it's making your brain go to work to find low quality answers. So why does he always treat me so poorly? Your brain is going to go, let's see, let's find evidence for why he always treats you so poorly. Well, he treats you poorly because he's a bad person, or he treats you poorly because you are a bad person, or he treats you, you're going to find all of these answers to that question, and they're not going to serve you. They're going to really hold you back. They're going to, go ahead.
like you said, some of which may not be true, because you're looking
Right.
for something that may not be there, yeah.
Yes, or all of which may not be true. It's just that your brain is going to find answers to whatever question you're asking. So if you can put your brain to work in a way that really serves you, then you're golden. So high quality questions tend to be questions that start with what or how. So things like, what could I do to communicate, this thing that's important to me, or what do I need to do so that I can make sure he understands that this is my boundary on this. And then your brain goes, oh, what could I do? Okay, I could do this, and it starts to give you these productive responses instead of things that are going to make you feel bad, that are going to lead you down a path that's not really going to get you where you want to go. And so I would use that process of developing a high-quality question in sessions with Jove, but I use that same process in every single session I have with a client. I use those high-quality questions in interactions with my family and friends and people that I'm around, because I find that it is just an infinitely more productive and beneficial process to use. And we naturally are asking questions anyway, so we might as well ask questions that guide us to helpful solutions instead of ones that guide us to kind of more of the same.
That's beautiful. I love that, and how you really allow for the person to go through their process of standing in fear, standing in anger, standing in this traumatic experience, whatever it may be, and you guide them to this space of unconditional love. And I know that you talk about in the book that the emotion of anger is an active energy. And this active energy just really allows for us to just pretty much go any and everywhere all over the map in the low quality questions or in the low energy that we stem from. And so by working with Jove, how do you take that active energy of anger and fear and bring it to a place of unconditional love? Because people are like, okay, how can working with a horse, create such a dynamic shift? But from reading the book and listening to you, it's all about the energetic response. And so let's dive in and really, really, for people to really understand the benefits of working with an animal, whether it be a horse or a dog, something that gives off the energy of unconditional love.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I love doing, this is a slight aside maybe, but, very often with clients, because right now I'm not doing sessions with horses. So what I have found is that I can use that same energy, the teachings that my horse Jove gave, and that all of the horses, I believe, are trying to teach us, as trying to teach human beings through these cards they're called the Way of the Horse cards, and they're sort of similar in a way to like a tarot deck. But basically, it's taking all of these different concepts and incorporating them into these cards that you can do spreads for people. So if I help them come up with a question, and then we get the guidance from the horses through these cards. And so it's a really powerful process. But also people who have pets in their home are always telling me, whenever I do a session with you, because their sessions are over the phone, So whenever they are doing a session with me, their cat will show up or their dog will want to be like right there with them, because they're picking up on that energy and they're wanting to participate. So I call that, when the cat shows up and is like meowing really loudly in the middle of something that they're saying or in the middle of something that I'm saying or asking them, I'm like, okay, so here is an opportunity for a feline experiential learning session. So, what is your sense of what your cat is wanting you to know right now? And so that's really a fun kind of evolution from that work. People don't even have to be in a round pen with me and a horse. They can get the same information from their dog or their cat or their hamster or through these, through doing a horse wisdom reading session with me. So it's just really fun how all of that kind of can continue even without having that physical experience. But you were asking about the fear and anger connection and about how that kind of moving through the fear to anger is movement in a positive direction. And I base that on the emotional guidance scale that's offered to us by Abraham Hicks, which has been really, I'm assuming that you are familiar with this, Hillis, but I don't know if other people listening are. So it's that, that one of the things that I learned from Jove is how quickly humans tend to switch from fear into anger. And that can seem like, oh, that's not good. It's not good to go into anger. And I think it's true that it's not good to stay in anger once you've gotten there, that, the idea is not to like just be in anger and then the period, end of story, there you are in anger and you just stay there forever. But there is movement in that because fear is really, really, really low on the emotional guidance scale. It's like kind of the most disconnected, the most kind of powerless feeling that we can have. So if you flip into anger in that moment, then you can either get out of whatever situation you're in that's dangerous, that's causing you to feel that fear, or you can change the energy so that you're not feeling like a victim of something, so that you're not feeling like, just at the effect of something. So it can really kind of catapult you forward. And then you can keep moving up through, then usually the next feeling that we have after anger is blame. Like if we look at the coronavirus experience, a lot of people went from fear and, kind of bouncing back and forth through all of these different emotions, but that initial fear and powerless feeling that people had, and then they kind of went right into like anger and just like, why isn't anyone taking care of this? Or why did this, why is this happening in my life? Why is this happening to me? It's pissing me off. I lost my job. I lost whatever, that sort of energy. And then they tend to move into blame, which also seems like it could be negative, but that's actually a higher vibration than anger. So blaming our government or blaming, the people who aren't staying home and socially distancing, or, finding that place of blame is actually movement in a higher vibrational direction. It's just, but again, you don't want to stop at blame. You want to keep moving up. So then maybe you move into worry or doubt or feeling overwhelmed, which I've been experiencing a lot of lately. And then you can move from there into, a whole other set of like maybe pessimism or, so it's just a way
hanging out in hope, as I like to call it.
Yeah,
hanging out in hope,
exactly.
for sure, because when with anything, it still tends to lend itself to this active energy, because energy is always active, and I like how you describe it in your book, because how you describe it is very simple for people to grasp. It's not this over-defined term. It's like, I have to do what to get to here, and I'm like, it's that easy. And the emotional center of all of us is complex, especially if we start from a place of fear or hate, the journey is jarring for a lot of us. It's like, okay, how do I get from there to there? And I'm like, you can't. You just got to be where you are and understand where you are to get to the next step. And I think a lot of people want to just get to the next step and not be where they are. And I like how you put at the end of each chapter an activity, a reflective space for people to really understand where they are, to really get to understanding the space in which they are, to allow for the new energies to come up. And I want to just read a little something from the book here, too, and I really like how you defined this. And what I'm going to read is a snippet about, in the chapter 4 of What's Unconditional Love. And you say, Jana, and I quote, unconditional love means loving and welcoming all the parts of someone, even the parts that feel uncomfortable for you to have to deal with. That's very powerful. Because, in any relationship, as we talked about in the beginning of the show, whether it's, a relationship with a person, friend, family, spouse, potential, romantic interest, food, money, doesn't matter. You love what you love in the way that you love it. And, there's all colors of the spectrum here, but I want you to really go a little bit deeper here with this and really for us to, from your point of view as a relationship coach, especially the tail end, because we all understand and have an idea of what unconditional love is and how it feels, especially, a mother's love and when we find our spouse. But then there's always those parts that we that we don't pay attention to or tend not to see or ignore. But, how do you deal with that, especially when you want to move into a space of unconditional love?
So I wrote this book a few years ago. And so since then, of course, like with everything, there's evolution happening. There's change. Things are different now for me than when I wrote this. And so my relationship with that idea of unconditional love has also, changed and grown. And I think of it as being like almost like a lens that I can look at things through. So if I was being unconditional love, what would this conversation sound like? Or if I was being unconditionally loving, how would I respond to this particular thing that somebody said or did? And that creates, that's A, it's a high quality question. And B, it kind of puts me into that space of reaching for that energy of unconditional love. And so in any given situation, in any given moment, that might look different. So you may be noticing this kind of through line here that life is dynamic. It's always changing. It's always shifting. And so if we can have something that we are coming back to, or a way of seeing and experiencing our life that gives us a touch point, and that also allows us to access our higher selves, I think that's unconditional love. That's unconditional love for ourselves and for those around us, because it's love as a verb. A friend of mine who's also an author, Patty Dye, talks about that, and I think her first book is called Love is a Verb. So it's, what can you do in this moment that is unconditional love? And then you just are doing the best that you can, and I think the more of us behaving in that way, and the more of us with that orientation, the better off we all are. We're all in this together. So, yeah.
I love that. And, it brought to mind the smallest action.
Mm-hmm.
No matter, if you cross someone's boundaries, whether if you're hanging out in hate or fear or hanging out in hope, no matter the smallest action that you take or the smallest step, anything, that love is present in that. And it just really helps to reshape and redefine one's thinking. Because, not to play devil's advocate, because we only have a few minutes left, but, it even brought to my mind the people who even commit suicide. How much love do they have for themselves not to be in pain anymore? So, regardless of what action is taken, there's always love in it. We may not see the love. We may not understand the love or the action taken in that, but love is always present. We just have to open our eyes to feel it, because we have grown so much to be tangible. And now things are shifting to being intangible.
Yeah.
So final thoughts here, Jana. By working with your clients in relationships, what are some of the biggest things that you have seen, and what are some of the tips you can offer to the listeners of advice when facing some of these big relationship hurdles?
What a great question. So, for me, it always comes back to make sure that you are connected with you first. So whatever that looks like for you, whatever your relationship is with you, you again with a capital Y, that has to come first. Because if you are not taking care of yourself and nurturing and tending to your own connection, to your higher self, to source, to God, to the universe, to your soul, your heart, whatever you want to call that, then you can't really fully connect in the way that you're desiring. Whether you have a relationship that you're in right now or not, the only way of deepening a connection is to first address your own connection to you. And then from there, once you have that connection, then all of the other relationships that you're in, all the aspects of others that we call into ourselves, the way that those relationships feel will totally shift in an instant even. Do I have time to tell just a really quick story?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I had a session over the phone the other day with a client who was sort of struggling with her child, like in this time of home quarantine and homeschooling and stuff like that. And she found herself getting really impatient. And even getting to the point of like shouting at her child. And we had the opportunity to kind of explore what that was about through a variety of different kind of experiential learning activities over the phone. And what she got to, and what I was able to get to as well through her process, is that same kind of thing of, okay, I need to get connected with me first. It's not about like, I need my kid to do what I'm telling her to do, or, I need her to whatever XYZ thing. It's about first, what is the place that you are coming from when you're asking that question? Would you even be asking that question if you were feeling really tuned into yourself, And then, so she did that work and she put it into practice and she integrated it. And she told me the next time we talked that her response, that she got this really powerful response from both her child and from the friend of this child, who were both like, wow, what's different? Like, what's changed? You're like, you seem totally different with us. You know, you're interacting in a totally different way with us. And she was like, you know, amazed at how quickly that can shift. So I just wanted to share that it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out thing. It can really shift in a moment.
Yes, like anything, all it takes is having to take inspired action to follow the energy that you feel to do what is being called to be done.
Yeah.
And with that, Jana, let us know where people can find you on social media or where they can purchase your book or your website, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So probably the easiest way to get to all of my different presences is through my website, which is janakellam.com, which is spelled JanaKellam.com. And so you can get to my book from there. You can get to my Facebook. I also have a Facebook group that's called the Everlasting Love Club. And so you can request to join that. I have an Instagram page. I have all of the things. So, but yeah, just going to my website is the easiest way to get to all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jana, and it was such a great pleasure of exploring with you and diving deep today on Light and Sight, and I look forward to connecting with you again very soon.
Thank you. Same to you. I so appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I'm really grateful to have been able to connect with you and have this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana, and everyone. Have an amazing day. Till next time.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. But heard instead, dear listeners, through podcast radio on realrevolutionradio.com. Never before has inspirational podcast radio been taken to this next level of wow. Until now. Today, in the age of information, more and more people are searching for answers and in solutions and how to better approach and perceive every day-to-day concerns by tuning in to realrevolutionradio.com. Isn't it about time we take back our lives, back in consciousness, in a higher state of awareness, in the evolution of our own state of higher well-being? Yes, we can do so consciously every day by tuning in to the many groundbreaking and third eye-opening podcasts. Our new Cleveland-based network of over 33 paradigm-shifting internet talk shows. Only on realrevolutionradio.com. Be part of that change. Evolve. Be inspired.